All right, my name is Mike Fodish. I'm from Elektrobit, and I'd like to talk a little bit about complexity in software. Just waiting for a second for the slides to come up. All right. So Elektrobit has a long history in creating automotive software, especially bringing software into production with all the strict rules that are related to that. Complexity is one of the issues that you always have to deal with. Today, I want to take a look a little bit at the complexity in SDL, and would like to introduce a tool that we developed in Elektrobit to understand complexity and to deal with it. All right, when we look at SDL, we have, of course, SDL Core, which is the main part of SDL in a sense. And for the development of SDL Core, we have our colleagues from Livio who do a great job with all the processes and scrutiny and ways to understand that contributions will not break anything. So this is good for new contributions to make sure that nothing breaks. But looking at SDL and the different components that are interacting, so you can, although you can try to keep the development part kind of under control, there's still complexity just because of the way SDL is set up. And there's a little picture here to outline this. So SDL Core has to communicate with SDL HMI, can use WebSockets or something else. SDL Core also has to communicate with the underlying operating system, either directly or indirectly via supporting components for things like vehicle data, for things like speech, for example. And then you have the operating system communicating with the mobile device, depending on what physical transport is actually used. It could be Bluetooth, it could be some USB based connection or something else. And on top of that, you have then the communication between SDL Core and the actual mobile application. This is the RPC protocol where data is exchanged and processed. A mobile app would typically also communicate to its own backend. Let's say it's a weather application that needs to pull the latest weather information for a particular location, or it's a media application that needs to pull media content. And then you have also a little bit hidden communication going on between SDL Core and an OEM-specific cloud for things like policies or other services that then OEM might choose to implement. So just looking at the number of components that have to interact, there is complexity. So in EB, we developed a tool called EB Solace, which allows to combine data from different sources into one tool where the data can be viewed, it can be analyzed, it can be processed further, and that can be used as a base for, just create an understanding of what the system is actually doing. This is especially important when you have to integrate third-party components that do something, but you don't know exactly how they function. The tool can be used for further analysis, for debugging purposes, but also for KPIs. So you can define particular use cases that you want to trigger in your system and have EB Solace pull particular values, process them, and then you could make decisions about the quality of your product based on that. How does it work? EB Solace has two parts. There's the so-called target agent running on the target and collecting the data from the target. And you have a host application running on a desktop environment that can be used then for the analysis of the data. The platforms that are supported on the target side, target agent, are mainly Linux-based or POSIX-based operating systems like Linux, QNX, but also Android and Windows are supported. The target agent part of AB Solis is open source. That can be downloaded today. You can play with it if you want. And on the host side, we have a application that is Eclipse-based, so it requires Java, and out of the box, it's running on Linux as well as Windows. Now, where does the target agent actually get the data from? So the target agent itself is just a generic little tool running on the target, but the actual data is coming through plugins. And there are different plugins available for different types of data. So for logging purposes, for example, there are plugins that can read DLT-based logging. We can intercept certain communication paths like WebSockets. And then there's data that's just available in the operating system like CPU load or memory consumption. So data is collected, it's pushed over to the host application, there it can be viewed, and it can be processed further. For that part, we have an interface that allows scripting, so you can then, through the range of different data sources that you have, define rules to do some pre-processing, to combine things, however, whatever is needed for your particular use case. And then a feature that is coming now in AB Solis is that we support distributed systems as well. So right now it is one target agent running on a single target, communicating with the host application. In the future, we will have multiple target agents that provide data into the host application. And this is exactly what we need kind of for the SDL scenario, where we have other processes running on a mobile device, even in the cloud, if there's a way to get the data from there. And also considering that some OEMs are going towards a single processor, but multiple operating systems by using hypervisors. So there you have virtual devices where you also want to collect data from each. Okay. Just a very high-level overview so far. Here, a little example on how that could actually look like. In this example, we collected data from a system running SDL on top of automotive-grade Linux. The data that we collected was CPU load. We intercepted the WebSocket communication between SDL core and SDL HMI. And we had some other data like memory consumption and log files. So looking at the graph of the CPU performance, that's what the graph is showing. You see peaks there, and the idea is, okay, I want to know what is actually happening at that moment in time. What causes the peak in CPU load? So what you can do in the tool, you can click in the graph at the location that you're interested in and create a so-called time marker. And that is synchronized with all the other data sources that you have collected in your host application. So we could now take a look at, for example, the WebSocket communication. Here's a table of all the messages that were recorded. We see the time marker there in the middle showing up. And in order to this is JSON-based communication. So if you want to understand a little bit better what exactly was sent from where to where, we can mark some messages, select some messages around the time marker, run a custom script, and get something like, like this. So a sequence diagram that tells us what really happened around that moment in time. So here we see, it's probably very hard to read, sorry for that. We see that perform interaction happened and some add commands, and then right after another perform interaction. So you get a very high level view of what happened in a system, and you can go from there and try to understand if this makes sense, if this what was actually intended at that moment in time. Okay, with this I'm almost done. Just a quick summary. So most of the tools that I mentioned in this presentations can be accessed via those links. EB is preparing a package of EB Solis for the SDL use case that would contain the target agent. Again, it's open source, and plugins for typical SDL use cases. Also, it would contain the EB Solis Essentials version of the tool and some SDL-specific scripts that can be used for visualization or analysis. Again, all the tools, all the pieces that we're providing here are either open source or free. And yeah, we hope that this is a worthwhile contribution, and would appreciate any feedback or even participation in developing the open source part further. All right, thank you very much.